Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to BookTrek 2021. This is a 5-month mission in which myself and a handful of other intrepid booktubers are reading Star Trek fiction. For the rest of the year, we're reading Star Trek fiction, starting in August with the original series. We're going to go franchise by franchise instead of roaming all over the Alpha Quadrant. So the Star Trek, the original series, is for August. Of course, Star Trek, the original series, is my Star Trek. I was there when it was on TV. I was there when it was in reruns. I was gobbling up every single piece of writing that I could from fans that I knew, from fans I was introduced to, all sorts of crappy dot matrix zines where the fan fiction was unprintable and unspeakable. and as that whole process grew, I was overjoyed, as were all Star Trek fans, original Star Trek fans, to see the movies and to watch how they were good. When the movies were good, when you were in a movie theater watching a multi-million-dollar production of a show that you've loved from the beginning, you're surrounded by people who are loving it too, there's no greater feeling. But being who I am, I paid most of my attention to the books, and I followed them from their beginning and read them all. And I am taking advantage of BookTrek 2021 to go back to a lot of those books and read them again. I'm ruling out the books by authors that I really like. I'm ruling out the books that I really love. I thought I'd give all the other novels a chance. The only other ruling out that I'm doing is if I've read something recently. If I've reread a Star Trek novel recently that isn't one of those categories, I won't do it again. I'm trying to give a kind of a fresh look at Star Trek fiction. And as usual, on this channel, as you've come to expect if you watch this channel, I'm doing a whole lot more videos than any of my co-hosts. I gently pointed that out in a few videos, and then I had it gently pointed out to me that we already know that you make tons and tons of videos. So those are kind of the guidelines that I'm using here, and they definitely apply today. Because today we're doing this, Mutiny on the Enterprise by Robert Vardman. And Robert Vardman's other Star Trek, he wrote one other Star Trek novel that is, he wrote another Star Trek novel, I don't actually know how many he's written, but he wrote one that's much better known than this, called The Klingon Gambit, that I had to rule out because it's just a few years ago that Mark Richardson of Richardson Reads found a paperback copy of The Klingon Gambit and sent it to me, and I read it then. But I haven't reread Mutiny on the Enterprise in quite some time, so I gave it a try. I remember reading this when it first came out in the 1980s, and being disappointed with it. On reflection, I was disappointed with the Klingon Gambit as well. I don't think that, no offense intended here, but I don't think Vardman's very good. He's certainly not very good as a Star Trek writer. And that impression was not changed by a reread of this book. First of all, I should say that the cover has 2 unfulfilled promises. It has 2 red herrings on it. The first one is the time period of the novel. The novel clearly takes place in the first 5-year mission of the Enterprise. A few trappings here and there, but it's clearly in Jim Kirk's first 5-year mission on the Enterprise. So why we have Star Trek the Motion Picture era costuming, I have no idea, except that Star Trek the Motion Picture was fairly new, and everybody knew about it, and so you want the characters to look like the movie. That's red herring number 1, and red herring number 2 is the title of the book. I would love to read a Star Trek novel that was actually the Mutiny on the Enterprise. I would love to read that. That could be done superbly well. But this is not that. This is the Enterprise is called to space station number 1, and Kirk is imperiously ordered, well, despite the fact that your ship needs massive repairs, and that your crew needs massive R&R. They haven't had any kind of rest in a long time. You've been on very strenuous missions. You have to go out right away. On this diplomatic mission, take a diplomatic crew with you and go on a diplomatic mission to a distant planet. That's flagrantly unbelievable just on its own. The admiral who gives Kirk these orders says, there are no other ships that can do this. There are no other ships that are in working condition to do this. Her clear implication is that there are no other Constitution-class starships that are able at all. They're all undergoing some sort of massive repair. Don't have engines, don't have a bridge. I remember reading that the first time and thinking, okay, well, then the Klingons would invade. If you don't have a Starfleet, then the Klingons would invade. So who would care about a far diplomatic mission? That's just such a silly thing. And you see it repeated over and over again in the movies. You're the only ship in the quadrant. You're the only ship within range. Is Starfleet a professional military service, or is it not? Either way, the crew is on their way. Kirk takes the mission. There's no way that he would. There's no way that Starfleet would want him to. He informs this admiral that there's a chance the ship's warp engines could blow up. They're in that bad a condition. And his engineer is willing to swear to that. And the ship is sent out anyway. On a diplomatic mission. Ridiculous. It happens, and the crew goes, and on the way they encounter a stranded vessel with one life form on board. A woman who appears somewhat human, and who says that her name is Lorelei. Again, I want to mention, Robert Barton doesn't seem to be on his best game when he's writing these kinds of things. I just lowered and shook my head, 40 years ago when I read that the first time? Same thing the second time. Lorelei. Does a character named Lorelei have any kind of mythological significance? And if so, could it be as a songstress, a siren, a temptress? And if so, does nobody on the Enterprise know that? Spock, with his infinite recall, never know that? Lorelei, as would befit her name, starts to bewitch the crew and drives them to mutiny. There are all sorts of side adventures. Spock and McCoy have a side adventure. Kirk has a side adventure of his own before a very unsatisfying ending that doesn't really seem like an ending at all. And the whole time, the first time I read this, I was pining for a novel that it is not, which is not something that a reviewer can do, but it's certainly something a reader can do. And the second time I thought, all right, be a little more generous, give it a little more of its own leeway, and I was still pining. For a novel about a mutiny on the Enterprise that is not done by alien sorcery. That is not done that way. That is an actual mutiny where rancor sets in and grows to the point where a strategically placed core of people, crew and officers, actually do want to try to mutiny on board the Enterprise. It's a long shot as a story. It would take a really good writer to do, because when in the original series, the one time that Mr. Spock even raises the prospect of, is this possibly a mutiny, everyone is instantly piously shocked at the mere idea of mutiny. The implication in that moment is that it's unheard of in Starfleet. We learn in the original series that it certainly is not unheard of in Starfleet. But it certainly would be a tough act to manage with this crew. We get the strong impression in the original 3 seasons of Star Trek and in some of the best Star Trek novels that Kirk might be a disciplinarian. He certainly knows what he wants and he expects the best of his people, but that he runs a happy ship and that he sees the virtue of that. In this, you could draw a direct parallel with Captain Jack Aubrey in Patrick O'Brian's Aubrey and Maturin novels. Jack Aubrey makes it perfectly clear to Stephen Maturin over and over again that he is a stickler for the rules. He will have things obeyed. He will have things looking good, performing well. He won't have any kind of incompetence, but that he prefers a happy ship. And he makes it clear that is pragmatism. That's not just, piety. That's pragmatism. A happy ship is a better ship. Runs better. We get the impression many, many times throughout Star Trek that one of the pieces of magic that attends to the original Enterprise is that it is basically one crew working together out of loyalty, out of a sense of cooperation. It's pretty tough to imagine the seeds of an actual mutiny on board the Enterprise having any time to grow into mutiny. But I'd love to see an author try it. It's a great idea. What if there actually were a mutiny on board the Enterprise? The setting is easy enough to imagine. Put the Enterprise far, far away from the Federation. Lord knows many times in the original series they are. Put them out of easy communication with any kind of Starfleet personnel. Put them in an emergency situation, maybe cripple the ship or semi-cripple the ship. There you go. Then you don't have the institution helping Kirk. Then it's just what happens if your crew wants to mutiny. Part of your crew wants to mutiny. The closest, I think, that any franchise of Star Trek really came to that being some kind of a possibility was Star Trek Voyager. And they never go there. They never try it. It's too complex to do in 1 hour of television, and it's not as interesting as an alien planet or a CGI monster. But Captain Janeway, without consulting even her officers, much less her crew, decides to strand her vessel on the other side of the galaxy. To strand everyone on board to what, as far as she knows at the moment, is a death sentence. A 70-year-long death sentence. Being picked apart, torn apart by alien species that we know nothing about. It's pretty clear that Janeway is new to Voyager when she makes that decision. That is ripe grounds for a mutiny storyline. And those ripe grounds only get riper when she decides to incorporate into her crew salvaged members of a Maquis vessel. The Maquis are in the act of violent rebellion against the Federation. And we know from seasons of Voyager, from episodes of Voyager, that plenty of those Maquis crewmen were not happy on board that ship. In other words, far more than the original series, far more than the Enterprise, Voyager would have been a great place for a mutiny storyline. That doesn't ever really happen. Again, if there's a Mutiny on Voyager novel that I have not read, I'll find out about when we get to Voyager later in the year, but I don't think there is. There's certainly no episode that does what I want. Where there isn't an alien on board, there isn't a spinning wheel of aggression, there isn't anything like that, where it's just the captain has to deal with it. And how does the captain deal with it? I could easily imagine in those two scenarios that Kirk and Captain Janeway would react very differently, would respond very differently to a mutiny. And the mind just boggles at how Jean-Luc Picard would do it. Jean-Luc Picard is probably the only of our marquee captains that I could easily imagine thumbing through Starfleet rules and regulations to see if he can execute the mutineers. He's the only one I can think of that would really do that. Maybe Benjamin Sisko on a bad day, but otherwise, no. But that's all fantasy because that doesn't happen in this book. Instead, it's alien mind control. And I think even Vardman, at some point in the halfway point of this book, realizes that's a bit of a non-starter. It's not actually a mutiny if the crew isn't in their right mind. If they're being affected by Lorelei, then it doesn't really count. I think he sort of realizes that because he throws in another big plot twist involving the planet they're headed to later in the book. That I don't know. The first time I read this, I thought, all right, well, that's interesting on a science fiction ground, but it doesn't belong in this book. And when I started it again for BookTrek 2021, I thought, maybe you'll be more forgiving. No, it doesn't belong in this book. It's just the book is not good. It's even boring the bean. Are you bored by Mutiny on the Enterprise, baby? Are you? Oh. That's why I've moved out here. A lot of you said you were very happy to see the little book room again, but the majority said, we really want to see Frida sitting there. They want to see her doing her yoga. They want to see her yawning or maybe licking me or looking at the camera. Well, you've had all that this time around. So your BookTrek 2021 for today is not a recommend, unfortunately. I wish I could. A lot of these old novels are good, and I've certainly had experience in BookTrek 2021 where I've gone back to a book that I didn't really like all that much the first time and loved it a lot more the second time. This is not one of those times. So I think tomorrow I'm going to try something radically different. You notice how many of the Star Trek novels I've been doing have this triple line border there and the number on the top there and the pocketbook logo in the middle and the painted, is this Rowena? Or Boris Vallejo, one or the other, the painted cover. I've been going a lot to those. They were comfort food for a long time. I regularly relied on them coming out in bookstores. And I'm thinking tomorrow, maybe for a few days, I will go elsewhere. Rather than revisit these very old novels, I will go elsewhere. I will go to places that I haven't been in a much shorter amount of time. I'll mull on it tonight. That's my routine with BookTrek, is that I talk to you about the book that I've just read, and then when I am facing the long, blissful, quiet hours of reading at night, I pick a Star Trek novel, and that is usually the amuse-bouche. That is the book I read first before I hunker down with the stuff that I'm actually going to be responsible for in readership. I hunker down with a Star Trek novel, and I usually I have all these things on ebook. I will usually just sort of page through and just pick something. But that's not completely random, right? If you look at these videos, you'll see that's not completely random. I am drifting towards these novels that look like this. This is novel 12. So it's early on, but still, it's a template. And maybe I need a different template. So I'll try that tomorrow. But for today, unfortunately, Hero Star Trek is not a recommend. So I'm going to wrap this up. There's no need on this channel for an endless parade of 45-minute videos. There's no need for it. No one is that interesting. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.